Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend.
Well, I am grateful for the invitation to come out here and talk to you folks. I don't get out west very often. However, I do have to tell you, I passed through St. Croix Falls four years ago maybe. I was on a big tour of Northwest United States. So I came through here on the first day, spent a couple hours at the Interstate Park. It's a wonderful time. Now I'm here for real. So we live in an age of incredible connection. We are more linked, more informed, more able to communicate than any generation in history. After I wrote that line, I took a brief inventory. Between Wusan, the hospice work that I do, and my personal accounts, I have 7 email accounts that I manage. I have 3 Facebook pages, plus 1 Facebook group. 2 telephone accounts with the incumbent texting and voicemail. Then there's a Blue Sky account, an Instagram account, and a Reddit account, plus the Wusan website. That's what I keep telling people, but I keep showing up, so that's okay. And yet for all our connectivity, we often find ourselves in a strangely dispassionate world. It's a world that runs on algorithms, not affection. A world of hot takes, not warm hearts. We scroll through a curated feed of global suffering. War in one post, famine in the next post, personal tragedy in the following post. And our souls, overwhelmed, have a built-in defense mechanism. They shut down. In such an environment, it's tempting to close our hearts for protection, to retreat into dispassionate reasoning and don the mantle of irrefutable logic. Yet this is precisely the opposite of what our deepest values call us to do. We are caught in a tension between the compassionate heart and the dispassionate mind. So dispassion is defined as a lack of strong emotions or feelings, but it arises in a cultivated awareness that frees the mind from the turbulence of desire and aversion. It's not indifference or coldness, but a calm detachment born of understanding. The sources of dispassion can be traced to experience, to reflection, and to the pursuit of inner clarity. Direct experience often awakens dispassion. And when we see the impermanent nature of pleasure and pain, how they both pass with time, they begin to loosen their emotional grip on outcomes. Success fades, beauty changes, possessions decay. These truths, witnessed repeatedly, erode the illusion that lasting happiness can be found in external things. Experience then becomes a quiet teacher of detachment. Reflection nurtures dispassion through discernment. Philosophers, spiritual teachers alike have urged us into contemplation about what is within our control and what is not. When we realize that emotions often arise from mistaken attachments or unrealistic expectation, the mind naturally steps back. This inner reasoning, especially when paired with mindfulness, fosters an equanimity rather than an apathy. Compassion and wisdom together deepen dispassion. The Dalai Lama suggests that compassion is the merging of empathy and wisdom. Empathy connects us with others, while wisdom prevents us from being overwhelmed by their suffering. This balanced concern, feeling with others yet not being consumed, reflects mature dispassion. It allows for moral clarity and steady action, even in distressing situations. In our world, centered as it is on science and mindfulness, the dispassionate mind becomes the pinnacle of our emotional aspirations. Now, dispassion, while often being praised for bringing clarity and peace, has some potential downsides, especially when it's misunderstood or taken to extremes. One major risk is emotional detachment or disengagement. If dispassion hardens into indifference, a person may lose the capacity to connect deeply with others. Relationships thrive on empathy, vulnerability, shared feeling. Excessive detachment can make one appear cold or aloof or unresponsive to the needs of others, undermining both trust and intimacy. Charlie Kirk gave rise to the notion that empathy is a made-up New Age term that does a lot of damage. He said he prefers sympathy. And I'll submit to you that empathy is a state of emotional engagement. I bear witness to you and share your pain. Whereas sympathy is a state of emotional disengagement. I bear witness to your pain and regret that you have it. Another downside to dispassion is moral passivity. When dispassion becomes apathy, the drive to act against impatience or improve the world can weaken, and passion often fuels creativity, compassion, and reform, and without it, a person might rationalize inaction, mistaking emotional restraint for wisdom. True balance requires caring deeply without being consumed, but that equilibrium is difficult to maintain. Dispassion can also stifle aesthetic and creative vitality. Many forms of art, love, and inspiration arise from emotional intensity. A detached observer might find it harder to access the raw energy that propels self-expression. The arts, for example, thrive on longing, joy, and grief, emotions that deep dispassion can blunt. I was on a trip many years ago, sponsored by the UU Social Service Committee, It was a bus trip through the sites of the civil rights movement. And after a day in Birmingham, and sitting in the park where the events of Birmingham took place with the gas and the hoses and the bullwhips and all that stuff, that night I went back to the hotel and I was lying in bed, and all of a sudden this huge emotion came up in me, and I was literally weeping in my bed. And out of that came the one poem in my life that I think is really good. But that kind of passion is what generates our creativity. And for those of you who are in the creative arts, you probably can speak to it better than I can. Last of all, dispassion may hinder personal growth. If it suppresses authentic feeling, emotions may, even painful ones, often serve as our teachers. Avoiding them in the name of calm can delay the understanding and transformation that comes from feeling fully and reflecting wisely. In essence, the danger lies not in dispassion, but in its imbalance. When combined with passion, compassion, and engagement, it leads to insight and peace. But when isolated from empathy or purpose, it can become sterile, detached, and morally inert. The challenge is to remain inwardly free while still fully human, able to care, create, and connect. Ultimately, dispassion comes from insight into the transient, interconnected nature of life. It's sourced not in withdrawal, but in seeing reality as it is. Those who cultivate dispassion through experience, reflection, and compassionate wisdom become free, less swayed by praise or blame, gain or loss, and more capable of living with peace, purpose, and authenticity in a restless world. Compassion, on the other hand, is the ability to suffer with, to enter into the joys and sorrows of another. It is not an optional virtue for a meaningful life. It is at the very core of what it means to be human. Compassion is not a sentiment reserved for gentle-hearted or the unusually empathetic. It's a discipline. It's a way of living that must be practiced, matured, and built up, especially when the world tells us to toughen up and turn away. The Dalai Lama reminds us that compassion is more than raw empathy. Empathy alone can be overwhelming, even distorted. But true compassion, he teaches, is the merging of empathy and wisdom. Empathy allows us to feel with others, while wisdom guides us to respond in ways that are discerning and balanced and sustainable. This insight shows us that compassion is not sentimentality, it is strength rooted in both heart and mind. And in a world that often mistakes hardness for resilience, this union of empathy and wisdom offers a deeper, more enduring way to live. So who do you know that gives endlessly of themselves? Always saying yes, always absorbing the pain of others until they are exhausted and burned out. I see a lot of that in UU churches. That is empathy without wisdom. Now imagine that same person learning to set healthy boundaries, to care for themselves as well as for others, so that their giving is sustainable and even helpful. This is compassion, empathy shaped and sustained by wisdom. It's not just about feeling deeply, but about acting wisely for the good of all. But we must acknowledge how hard it is to build compassion in a dispassionate world. When headlines speak of violence, when strangers are reduced to statistics, when the political rhetoric divides us into us and them, compassion feels countercultural, even naive. The systems that govern much of our lives reward efficiency, productivity, competition, not tenderness or kindness. To choose compassion is to resist the tide. It is not to insist that humanity of others is never disposable. It is to insist. It is to insist that humanity of others is never disposable, never secondary. And yet, even in the world of callousness, compassion is not extinguished. We see it flicker in the neighbor who checks in with the elder living alone, in the teacher who patiently listens to a struggling student, in the volunteer who shows up week after week at the food pantry. These acts are often quietly unnoticed by the larger world, but they testify to a power greater than cynicism. They remind us that compassion has always been the ground of human community, the glue that keeps us from unraveling into isolation and despair. I'm always touched by the volunteers who work for our hospice agency and come and visit folks in nursing homes, because most of them spend most of their day alone. I was visiting a woman Friday, and she has pictures of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren on her wall. She says, "Oh, I look at them all day long. I've never met them." Because they live a long way away. But it's that kind of caring that we do for people we don't know that makes compassion such an important part of the fabric of our society. The challenge before us is not only to notice these sparks, but to kindle them into a flame. And we must ask ourselves, how do we cultivate hearts that remain open in the face of suffering? How do we create communities where compassion is the norm, not the exception? How do we speak and act in ways that remind us that mercy is stronger than judgment, that love is stronger than fear? So in the next few moments, I just want to reflect on how compassion can be built. Not as a fleeting feeling, but as a personal practice, a communal commitment, response to the dispassion of the age. When we build compassion, we're not only healing our neighbors, we're healing ourselves, and perhaps in some small but significant way, healing the world. So compassion as a personal practice at its root is not simply a burst of emotion, but it is a discipline. Most of us think of compassion as something we either feel or we don't feel, as though it's entirely outside of our control. But we can cultivate it, just as we train our minds to focus or our bodies to grow stronger, so we can train our hearts to respond with compassion. It begins in the smallest of ways, pausing long enough to really listen when somebody speaks, asking a second question when somebody says, "I'm fine," offering a word of encouragement when another person seems weighed down. These are not great and heroic acts, but the building blocks of a compassionate life. If we wait until the big crisis to practice compassion, our hearts will likely shrink under the weight of it. But when we nurture compassion in the daily and ordinary, we'll be ready when that extraordinary moment comes. We're invited to see compassion not as an occasional act of kindness, but as the very rhythm of our daily lives. And yet compassion cannot be built alone. It flourishes in the soil of community. Every time we gather, whether in families or circles of friends or wider groups, we're entering into a kind of school of compassion, a training ground where we practice patience with each other, forgiveness when we fall short, encouragement when we grow weary. In community, we learn that compassion is not a solitary effort. but a shared responsibility. History reminds us that societies survive and thrive through compassion. Communities have endured hardship by caring for the vulnerable, by widening the circle of belonging. This is our calling. In a fractured society, our neighbors, our organizations, and institutions can become beacons of compassion, safe places where people know they will be seen, heard, and cared for. When compassion is woven into the fabric of a community, it becomes contagious. One act sparks another until the whole is alive with mercy. Our shared humanity teaches us that we do not carry the burden of compassion alone. Together we bear one another's burdens, and in doing so, we create resilience, connection, and trust. And finally, we'll consider compassion as a countercultural witness. It's not just for our private lives or even for our communities. It's also our public witness to the world. In an age of dispassion, when cynicism and division and indifference are seen as signs of strength, choosing compassion is a radical act. It resists the temptation to see people as problems, statistics, or enemies. It insists that every life is precious and worthy of dignity. When we feed the hungry, care for the vulnerable, or stand alongside the marginalized, we're not only showing individual kindness, we are proclaiming that compassion is stronger than cruelty, that mercy is stronger than judgment. Compassion challenges systems that tell us efficiency is more important than humanity, or that profit is more valuable than dignity. Compassion disrupts cycles of violence and fear by insisting on love and justice as the final word. This is not to say that compassion is always simple. As some critics remind us, empathy and compassion can sometimes be manipulated into political or social contexts. Writers like Paul Bloom have argued that empathy in particular can be biased, favoring those most like us, and sometimes even fueling division. Studies in political science suggest that empathy can sharpen partisanship as we empathize with our side and harden against the other side. These critiques echo the worry that emotional appeals alone can be weaponized or lead us astray. Compassion is widely regarded as a virtue, but even in this noble quality can have downsides when it's unbalanced by wisdom, boundaries, or discernment. One risk is emotional exhaustion. Deep compassion, and especially in caregiving, activism, or helping professions, leads to compassion fatigue. When individuals constantly absorb others' suffering without replenishing their own energy, they may experience burnout, anxiety, or numbness. The Dalai Lama himself warns that compassion without wisdom can become overwhelming, turning empathy into distress rather than effective care. I know that I have to stop, care for myself when a patient I've been visiting for over a year passes away. They've become an old friend, and now they're gone. A second downside is enabling behavior. Excessive compassion can blur moral or practical boundaries, leading to one to excuse harmful actions or shield others from necessary consequences. For example, consistently rescuing somebody from the results of their behavior can prevent their growth and accountability. True compassion sometimes requires allowing discomfort so that learning and change can occur. Compassion can also lead to bias and partiality. We naturally feel more compassion for those we identify with, our family, community of people who share our worldview, while overlooking the suffering of distant or unfamiliar others. Without reflection, compassion can reinforce tribalism, rather than transcend it. And finally, compassion can create emotional imbalance if it becomes performative or self-sacrificial. People may overextend themselves to prove their goodness, confusing compassion with self-neglect. This can erode authenticity and mental health. In some, the downside of compassion emerges not from caring too much, but from caring without clarity. When guided by wisdom, compassion becomes sustainable, impartial, and empowering. But without that balance, it can turn into fatigue, confusion, or dependency. To be people of compassion, then, is to bear witness to a vision of the world where the last are lifted up, the broken are healed, where the stranger is welcomed, and where love reigns over all. It's not an easy path, but it is one that lights the way forward. And in following it, we shine as lights in a world desperate for warmth, connection, and hope. As Unitarian Universalists, we are armed with powerful values to help light the way. Justice and equity are fueled by the moral urgency behind justice, behind compassion. The compassion provides that moral urgency, calls us to relieve suffering and confront unfairness. Yet dispassion provides the steadiness to act wisely rather than reactively. Together they balance heart and reason. Compassion drives us to care, while dispassion ensures our pursuit of justice remains fair-minded and sustainable. Transcendence, interconnection, and dispassion. Dispassion helps us transcend ego and the illusions of separateness. It opens the way to perceive the deep interconnection of all beings without being overwhelmed by emotional entanglement. Compassion, informed by this insight, becomes universal rather than selective, rooted in understanding rather than sentiment alone. This pairing reflects a spirituality grounded in clarity. Finally, gratitude, pluralism, and love. And when compassion meets dispassion, gratitude arises naturally. An appreciation for the shared human condition, joys and sorrows alike. Dispassion allows us to respect differing truths, pluralism without defensiveness, while compassion sustains an open heart towards all perspective. So, my friends, we are called to build compassion as a practice, as a community, as a witness, empowered by our love-centered values. The world may tell us to harden our hearts, but compassion calls us to open them. The world may urge us to turn away, but compassion calls us to draw near. And in choosing compassion again and again, we will discover not only that others are healed, but that we ourselves are transformed. For compassion is not only our duty, it is our joy, our hope, and our path toward a more humane world. May it ever be so.